Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hey, I'm Jess, and you're listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay.
On today's episode, we're going to discuss how social media and social media trends come into the therapy room. So, part of our decision to cover this topic comes up from a video that I recently made for our social media for Your Therapist Is Not Okay. This was to kind of hop on a trend that came up, and I just did a little smile and a wink while we had just one little phrase floating around about therapy and lying, because we recently did this episode on how therapists feel about being lied to. So my first kind of self-critique about our post is like, it doesn't have a lot of depth of meaning to it. And yet it became one of our most popular posts ever. And that really got us kind of thinking about another angle on something Jess and I have talked about before, which is all these social media trends that are about mental health and diagnoses and so on.
Yeah, it feels like in some ways social media has really taken off with what we can kind of think about in terms of our own health and wellness, our diagnoses of ourselves. And some of it's really cool because obviously it can help us destigmatize, which you and I are all about.
Hmm.
But as you perfectly said, there's also times where it's just about following a trend and grabbing a hold of the snippy kind of music or a video. I just saw one today on like how we feel about something, and Trudeau, our prime minister, was just like, This means absolutely nothing, but it's probably very popular.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. And we have both had various experiences of when clients might bring up something they saw on TikTok or Instagram, and have a question for us or want to share something about that. So they'll, come in and say like, oh, I saw this thing, about maybe narcissism or something like that, and then want to talk about that.
I think often when a client brings that up to me, it's
Mhm.
usually caveated with an I'm sorry, but
Mm.
like, I'm so sorry, Jess, but I was looking on TikTok and I saw this thing. Can we talk about it? I think there's an assumption that I'm going to be offended that they found something about mental health on like social media.
Mm.
If I'm really trying to wrap my head around it, I wonder if it's something about like someone else taking the insights that I might give, or
Mm.
like that it's maybe not as robust or educational as can happen in my office. Like
Mm.
most of the time, I love that they're bringing in like kind of a launching pad to us talking about a bigger topic. Like it's not something that ever really upsets me, but I noticed that a client probably says sorry. Maybe the same way I say I'm sorry to my doctor, or like I get a little bit embarrassed when I'm like, I think that what's going on with like my knee might be this because I Googled it.
Mhm.
So I could see it being kind of the same thing of like we look online for something that might not have as much robust knowledge as the expert in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of tracks, and like I can notice that temptation in myself too, whether it's medical or anything else, or even mental health kind of stuff, where I'm like, ooh, um, and then normally like I would do if it's mental health, I would look into other sources as well to see like, what's research saying about this, etc., because that's my field. But the things that I see that are trending that are not my field, like fitness trends and stuff like that, like I might notice myself really buying into something that I don't know more than 30 seconds about from someone that said like do this stretch and all your back problems will be solved. Um so it's kind of interesting to think about that. And I don't know how other professionals in other fields might feel about that, but I really don't mind. People have, as long as there's been therapy, drawn on other sources of media at the same time as they're seeing their therapist to kind of try to understand themselves. That might be something from their belief system, right? Especially back in the day, a lot of what people read was their own religious texts, and that was a way to understand the self and relationships with others. Self-help books, all kinds of different things, or even, clients might pick up dense theory books and want to really engage with them and read them and learn a lot from them. So I have had many clients who found kind of the most success in their healing journey when they had not only me, maybe they were doing some other kind of holistic practice and they were doing some reading on their own and they were journaling more and we were working together. And when they found the right combination of supports, that's when like healing clicks for them. So I feel kind of excited actually when I see people having that energy for their wellness in other areas of their life.
I think what you're pointing to is something actually pretty important that maybe we don't talk about enough, that this isn't new. We just have a new platform for discovery. I'm thinking about like how many times eggs have been thrown under the bus. Like sometimes eggs are like the best thing you can eat for the protein it gives
Mhm.
you. And then all of a sudden the yolk is bad and you only can eat the egg white. Like bloody eggs really like get like a harsh rap. And then sometimes like they're good. We've seen this like throughout our whole growing up. When it comes to mental health, we've seen a lot of self-help books from like before. There's a book that a lot of my clients really like that is, I'm just going to grab it. It's like Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Mm,
This is an awesome book, but the drama of the gifted child came out like 30 years before it. And that
mm,
also was a great book, also about the same kind of thing of how we develop a level of being kind of parentified before we should be, right? And so I'm thinking about like all these different books. Attached is another one that like we now all know about attachment theory from a very popular book. When
mm,
attachment theory was really starting to come to head in the 70s through psychodynamics from a researcher, Mary Ainsworth. Like we can see all these trends kind of like the very term, kind of being popular, getting out of kind of like the public eye and then coming back with like a vengeance. And so TikTok and Instagram and any other social media that you look at is kind of doing exactly that. It's grabbing onto something that might have been well understood before that then comes into the public eye.
mm. Absolutely. And as you're saying that, like I see that kind of like coming and going even in the more professional sphere, where I know we've heard people talk about like, oh, I really do kind of attachment therapy. I like attachment theory a lot more than that like old psychoanalytic stuff, which is frustrating to hear because John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, these were psychodynamic psychoanalysts way back in the day that originated the theory of attachment.
Like
Uh,
literally created it. And you're like, no, no,
Literally.
I want none of that. I'm like, no,
Yes.
actually, that is that.
And the same terms that we use to this day are the terms that they're using. It was not that substantially changed.
No.
But like something about like the newer book, like maybe it hit a zeitgeist, maybe it was said in a really digestible way. It's this kind of typical trend that a lot of researchers will know about like new stuff happens on the fringe of the field and it isn't understood and integrated for 10, 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
And then it kind of comes into mainstream. But in all of these even newer things, right, there's that nugget of truth.
Yeah.
It's cool that people are talking about attachment more, even if we have this kind of like background thing. We're like, well, that's a little frustrating. There's still the truth to it. And the same kind of thing we talked about with social media, there are sometimes these nuggets of truth. Like that is a real diagnosis, and it's cool that it's being talked about more.
I think the difference between a book and a clip is that you often are trying to get so many views, but you only have 30 seconds to 2 minutes to do it. And
Mm,
so you're going to give the hard hitting, like kind of like very catchy, kind of clickbaity things in order to get your viewers. And so you're going to see this, but you won't necessarily get to have all of the data behind it.
mhm,
And that can be really tricky because a lot is missed when you are just seeing, what if your boyfriend's a narcissist? Here are 5 traits. And you're like, okay, there is a huge diagnostic category to narcissism.
mhm,
Calling someone a narcissist is just a mean way to say they're being selfish. Like it's how do you navigate that as a therapist?
mm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, kind of something where I think it grabs a hold of a couple different temptations that we have that are totally normal to have as humans. And one is to find all problems in our life outside of us, right? So there's no development that I need to do. It's just that all these people are narcissists. Well, maybe
Mm,
these people do have some narcissistic traits. I don't want to devalue clients' opinions and, the experiences they've had. But what I might kind of do is talk about like, well, why do you think there are so many narcissists in your life? What's kind of going on with the needs that you're trying to have met and not getting met and kind of repeating this cycle. So that's where I think therapy comes in. That I'm like, actually cool that you saw this trend about narcissism because now we can really talk about it in this more nuanced way. Even though I think a lot of trends operate through the temptation of a quick fix, right?
yeah. This is captured in 1 minute. This grabbed my attention. It's a video I'm going to sit with for the minute it is before I click to the next thing.
Hmm.
But what you're saying is actually really important because you're bringing in diagnoses and how diagnoses have become quite popular in social media to kind of have a digestible understanding of a relatively complex term. And I think you perfectly nailed it. It's not actually a bad thing. You really allow yourself to have a foothold into something that then becomes a topic in therapy. And narcissism was quite popular for a little while before, like every trend, and this is kind of a problem in, I would say, in mental health, is that trends fade, but mental health doesn't. And and so it's interesting to think this isn't trendy anymore, so I shouldn't have it is not something you can really do with mental illness.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I even think about kind of approaches to diagnoses that have really been invented largely by social media or popularized, even though they're not really, they don't have the stamp of approval from like the diagnostic boards, right? Like the DSM is where most of us are getting our diagnostic criteria here in the West. And there are things like covert narcissism. It's a big
Mm,
trend to talk about covert narcissism.
yep.
And it does kind of have a list of things that like, oh, that's one way narcissism might show up. It's not a formal diagnosis,
No.
which isn't to say it's not real, but it
Mhm.
is to kind of question like what is the desire to diagnose ourselves with or others with these kind of flashy things.
Mm,
And in sometimes I was saying to Jess before this podcast that these things don't always destigmatize. Just because we're talking about it, it can sometimes become this kind of like social media or pop culture boogeyman where our
mm,
clients are coming to us and saying like, "Oh, I'm afraid I'm a narcissist," or "I'm afraid I have XYZ," uh,
mhm.
looking for us to say, "No, you don't." Or they might take that to their doctor too, because depending on where you're practicing and how you practice, therapists don't always diagnose, like we've talked about a few episodes ago.
Yeah. And what we were talking about just before is you can also then pathologize others that
Mm.
might have harmed you or might display characteristics that can then become weaponized. I'm thinking about my specialty in borderline personality disorder, BPD. When people with BPD come in, sometimes they come in very nervous because they wonder if they have it because someone else told them they've had it. That actually does pain my heart
Mm.
because to BPD is highly stigmatized.
Yes.
It is one of the most stigmatized diagnoses. It usually means you're erratic, selfish, you make very impulsive decisions. And I think that for people coming into my office that wonder if they have it, I can already see some sort of emotional abuse that might have been put onto them by blaming them, maybe asking for something from a partner that then gets weaponized against them. And so when
Mm.
we have all of this kind of crude understanding of diagnoses, we can then almost create this aspect of like, I know what you are. And that
Mm.
can actually be quite dangerous.
For sure. And kind of what you're naming there too, I hear, is like the things that show up on a lot of these trends that people diagnose others from are just these kind of like list of like, here's the negatives. Here's the way this kind of person would have wronged you. And they're not about like, here's maybe where this presentation would come from. Or here's some strengths that folks with this diagnosis have because they've learned and honed skills to survive. And so people come in with this idea about narcissism or BPD or whatever that's just like, it's all bad and I'm like, I'm the bad thing. And that's not the end goal of diagnoses, right? The whole point of any diagnosis is to better aid someone in recovery. If a diagnosis isn't helping someone heal, it's pointless. It's just a label. And kind of, I think that as humans, we love labels, that our brains really like a simple answer. We
Mm.
know this has been an established fact for a long time, that we like that simplicity and clarity so that our brain can move on to the next thing because we're always a little overwhelmed. And identity is one way this is showing up big right now in our culture. Identity is
Mm.
really important to us. And it's fair enough. It should be. But that kind of labeling as I know what you are that you just said, it made me think of like we want to not only be able to say, here's my identities, we want to say, I know your identities. And so I can simplify the way I think about you and treat you differently based on that. Better or worse, right? For whatever reason. And I see people engaging with social media and also taking on a diagnosis that they have self-diagnosed or even that a doctor has given them and saying, I am this.
Yeah.
I am an anxious person.
Hmm.
I have ADHD and I am neurodivergent. And these things can be really helpful in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that and people shouldn't be empowered to choose their own way to heal, choose the way that they want to identify. But it can become a barrier to change and growth if it's just like, this is what I am and that's it.
Mm.
And instead, it's actually the way to heal, at least in my mind, that way that this can come in helpfully in therapy is like, okay, let's talk about how it shows up uniquely for you, how
Mm.
you want to navigate it as a person, what maybe you want to ask your friends and family for to support you through this. It's not just that's who you are, and it's like anyone else that this trend talks about,
And I think that I don't I think I'm speaking for you too. Like you and I often have actually really railed against the DSM.
for sure.
And I think the reason why is because of that idea of like pathologizing a
Hmm.
behavior. To take borderline personality disorder, for example, like there's a lot of reasons why you might get put into that category, and a lot of reasons why you might not fit it.
Mm.
I've spent a lot of time trying to write the nuances of BPD and like in the articles we write for Centered Self, of being able to kind of talk about the important nuances. I even have an article written why I love working with those with BPD. And part of it is kind of this aspect of trying to fight against this nine symptoms of BPD that you might have, because by showing the other side, it kind of allows you to be more than just nine symptoms. And I think that when we want these kind of identity markers, those are good. But I think that a lot of times these ideas of diagnoses or mental health qualities that we have, our attachment styles, they're about insight. It's about gaining who we are and how we can become even more self-reflective. That if I know, let's use attachment theory. If I have avoidant attachment and someone's getting very close to me, that is what I bring to
Mm.
therapy, saying, I actually have a very secure partner right now. Can I work to start to like look into my past, to start to understand why I thought I couldn't rely on other people or that I needed to just be like in my own self as a form of safety?
Hmm.
Those are awesome ways of diving into this. Um, and I think sometimes if it just has these like particular qualities of like, these are identity markers, this is what I am, you're kind of right. It doesn't allow a lot of room for moving further than it or starting to gain insight by like looking back and thinking of our why. Once we do that, we can start to really get to the root of what's going on for us. Um, I wouldn't put that in with neurodivergence. I would just say this within like personality disorders and like other parts of like anxiety disorders and things like that. But I think that being able to dive into who we are, how we've created these defenses to help us is a way more interesting categorical kind of topic than just saying, I have this or I am this.
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And then to help us move past that in the sense of I know how I want to manage that. I know when I have this kind of conversation with my partner or my family member, I'm probably going to have these feelings come up, and this is the plan I have to take care of myself around that, or this is how I know I can communicate what I want to communicate successfully. Maybe I need to write it down. Maybe I need to plan it out ahead of time, or maybe I need to have a follow-up conversation. um, and with neurodivergence, the one connection I would kind of make with that, because it is different in that it's about a way someone's thinks and engages with the world on often like a fundamental brain structure level. But there too, it can be about how to help someone. The end goal isn't just to say you are X. It should then be a connection with services that support that, or ways of thinking, even just for yourself or along with a therapist or other professional, like, and so these are things that will help me to be successful in the way I want to be comfortable, have the kinds of relationships that I want, and communicate about them.
I really like that you said that because it's also like, here's what I need from you in order for my boundaries to feel really important, to be loved a particular way and to be treated a particular way. It gives us a standard of living and a standard of being with others.
Right. I mean, it might actually be something that helps change your life in a way that like you're able to improve your functioning, and get what you want out of things. A lot of it at the end of the day is really about getting what you want out of life.
Mm,
And if it's just we're yelling at people that I have this, how dare you? And we want them to draw a particular conclusion from that. They're probably not going to. But
mm.
if we instead learn how to ask, how to advocate, um, then we might actually get what we want. So that's the perspective I try to take with clients is like, this is actually about us trying to help you get what you
Mm.
want, get what you need. That kind of connects for me with the conflicting information that our clients sometimes get. That
Mm.
social media trend will say like these are the signs of ADHD, and then another one might say like, hey, here's three things that aren't actually ADHD, they're actually this.
Oh yeah, there's other videos like, do you have ADHD or do you just have anxiety? And you're like, I don't know. Like, how will I know this?
Right. And
Hmm.
it presents our minds with a problem that will capture our attention because we become anxious about it. About have we gotten it wrong? Do we not know who we are? Have we
Mm.
been wasting our time like with a certain approach or something? But then, you're kind of swimming in the sea of conflicting information.
It kind of also gets me thinking that, I don't know, I had this like brain like thought as you were saying that like, I wonder if it's kind of untrendy to have secure attachment.
I think you're really onto something with that because everyone has problems in their lives.
Like anxious attachment or preoccupied attachment or avoided. But like it's very rare for me to someone be like, yeah, I'm just secure. Like I'm just okay.
Right. And we all have troubles in relationships. And I think there's a temptation to say, oh, it's because of this big reason. And maybe it is. Talk to your therapist about it. But also, maybe it's just a normal relationship struggle. Not everything is pathology. And it's okay to work with a therapist, whether you have a diagnosis or not.
That's exactly it. I was just thinking that because
Hmm.
last episode we talked about, am I wasting my therapist's time? Right.
Right.
And so you might think you actually need something in order to bring us. Like, no, you do
No.
not. I think that that kind of like can be a real barrier to thinking about like, how do I get help if you don't have something? You're allowed to have had a really awesome childhood. Like you are. You don't have to find something that makes you like have to come to therapy if that's not what you're working with. And acknowledging both the good and bad are like one of the key ways of having mental health. You can
Hmm.
recognize that you've had a really awesome background, and yet certain things have also shaped you to allow certain defenses. If both of those exist together in my office, then we're really working towards mental health because you're allowing like two ideas to exist at the same time.
Absolutely. Yep. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's, to kind of similarly be fair to social media trends and weigh the positives and negatives, just like we can do with our lives. There are a lot of things that can be helpful about social media, little things that like can make a big change.
I was thinking that too. Like when we were talking about this, I was thinking about when we were talking about body dysmorphia a
Mm,
number of episodes ago. I had said, well, actually, we can be doing all of this work in therapy, but you might see something that just allows a click, allows a catalyst that can ignite this self-awareness in you. Um, to make that change that we maybe couldn't have done in therapy. Like with some of these videos, it actually does ignite curiosity.
mm,
Um, I saw a really cool video recently about mixed sized couples, and it was talking about Bridgerton and there being a bigger woman with a thinner man. And
mhm,
there was a bit of outrage, I suppose, on this. And then there was this awesome video that's like, yeah, this is insane. And then showed a number like from the decades, like of like a bigger man with a smaller woman, and basically saying, this is fine if you're a bigger man and the woman is small, which really then makes the point that being a bigger woman is a problem. It didn't say any of that. It just allowed our mind to kind of go there. And I could imagine a client seeing this and being like, oh, everything we've been talking about with systemic kind of body dysmorphia is all wrapped up into a video that was actually relatively digestible, but gave me a number of examples to make me see that. I
mm,
think that's awesome. And videos can actually have a way of allowing our brains to kind of put together the dots that
mhm.
maybe just talk therapy can't do.
Mm. Yeah, that like you said, like that's not someone's not just saying this to you. They're giving you kind of the evidence, the data. Like here's 20 data points that show you like size difference is actually not a problematic thing historically. It's the quote problem, the thing that's stigmatized or viewed negatively as a woman being bigger. And
Yeah.
they're not even saying it isn't that bullshit, but I'm saying it, and most of your brains watching that will be saying like, that's bullshit. How dare they? Um, and that sometimes that energy of the like, how dare they, or seeing someone like just living authentically and being happy in their body or in their situation or whatever that you relate to can be that click. Could say that part of it could be even through mirror neurons of like seeing like, oh, someone like me can be happy. And then your brain kind of starts to think like, I can do that too. I can
Mhm.
emulate that. And that can kind of help have that click that you talked about, or it could also be the initial catalyst to be like, wait, maybe I should talk about this again in therapy, or talk to my friends about this again. So it could start something, it could conclude something. Um, I think it can still be really special.
Hmm.
And some of my best stretches are from social media. So
I know my hips feel very loose now because I have the right moves to do.
So I don't want it to sound like I or we are, saying that it's all bad. I think what I'm really saying is it's more complicated than it appears in the trends, and to lean into it with nuance. It kind of
Mm.
reminds me of, I think it was maybe even last session I was saying like these things can be a provocation to lean in and ask more.
Mm. And allowing mental health to be part of our daily conversation is something that social media has allowed for us to have.
Mhm.
Um, I still fight that I do think mental health is still stigmatized in many
Oh yeah.
ways. We do not call in sick with having a panic attack or anxiety or depression. It's much more easy to say, I feel ill today, I have a headache or migraine. But at the same time, I think being able to have these conversations in a way that's maybe a bit more forgiving
Mm,
to talking about it, to allowing ourselves to explore. I've noticed a lot of people feeling much more comfortable saying, I think I would like to talk about having ADHD. And
mhm.
I'm noticing in the workplace, I may not be functioning this way. That's amazing. Those are conversations you can bring to us. And I would say, I'm not sure, I can't speak for every therapist, but I can speak for myself when I say, that's wonderful. That starts a good conversation.
Absolutely. And some of these, might ultimately be a way that someone thinks like, oh, my whole life I've had this experience and now it makes sense. now I have a way of understanding it and thinking about it, and I know I'm not just, quote, messed up. It can
Absolutely.
have that very powerful normalizing effect and give people answers.
Yeah. And I would say to anybody that's interested in this topic or seen something, bringing this to a therapist is an awesome way to start your journey. Like if you think you have maybe one of these things that's going on in social media, or you've been in a relationship that's been problematic based on what you're seeing, any of these things that we're seeing in social media, it's an excellent starting point for your journey of diving into that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been great to be with you.
Yeah, tune in next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.